perspective. I don't want to assume that everybody understands Agile from a practice perspective where they may be doing it every day. Some folks may, so as I saw in some of the comments in the chat, that some folks actually know about SAFe, so that's awesome. But we'll try to break it down and kind of talk about agility as a foundation. Then we'll talk about why scaled Agile is important and how that applies to organizations. Then we'll talk about specific SAFe certifications and then mapping that to what BAs have traditionally done, and that way you can kind of find your place. And then we'll talk about some next steps and some other things that I can share that may be of benefit. So like I said, I like to keep it super interactive. So can anybody in like a 10-second or less elevator definition give me a definition of agility or Agile as they know it? I know you guys have done Agile, so tell me what you know. Wow, is it that inexperienced out there? Somebody has to have been in an Agile environment or understand what agility means.
We have some comments in the chat box. They're typing it in.
Gotcha.
So we have so far on there small increments, flexible, doing stuff incrementally, a mindset, iterative development.
There you go.
Just enough to satisfy, meet value, release on demand, develop.
Flexible.
There you go.
Yep, I like it. Sorry, I had minimized that. I apologize. Yes, all that, very good definitions. At the end of the day, what are we trying to do with agility? You're trying to manage these things, right? You're trying to fix the business value. There's no business value till the end. You're trying to reduce that risk factor by seeing things sooner and having visibility, and then trying to preserve adaptability later in the process. So really, if you look at it from a graph perspective, those are the things that you're ultimately trying to do. And those things allow the business to be able to adapt, change to the market or customer needs, right? So probably don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but just to cover a couple things that I think are important with agility and the reasons why people are interested in looking at Agile and adopting it as a methodology that they use for their work. This is the example of the report that comes out every year, the 13th annual. Actually 2019-2020 survey is done and should be out shortly for the 14th annual State of Agile report. But pretty much the same benefits have been talked about for the last 8 years. You're accelerating software delivery. You're enhancing the ability to manage changing priorities, which we all know executives will change their mind on direction they want to go, right? So you have to be able to manage changing priorities. And then increasing productivity. How do I get more out the door? And that doesn't mean by working 60 hours or 80 hours a week. That's just not a realistic thing anymore. So these are the real benefits of why people are adopting Agile processes. So talking about agility, this is actually from some of the SAFe materials. Mick Kirsten, who is the author for Project to Product, CEO for TaskTop, if you guys are familiar with that application, he had a really good phrase that Scaled Agile is really expanded upon. Those who master large-scale software delivery will define the economic landscape of the 21st century. Well, let's talk about what that is. Well, the way SAFe is starting to define this, and they're kind of looking at it as saying there's in every historical phase, you have to understand what is the installation period, what is the turning point, and what is the deployment period for the new technology. And really, this is kind of how they've defined it: is the installation period is before there's really an explosion of how you're going to use that technology. There's a turning point, usually some catalyst, some event, some technology that changes the game, and there's a period of time where there's a lot of change and variability in the market. And then there's that deployment period, which is how do you take how do you put a bunch of capital in that technology to really advance your place in the market. So they've actually put that installation, turning point, and deployment period in a bunch of different things through history, and you can really kind of define what those look like. And they're kind of technology revolutions in and of themselves. And I won't get into all the history of all these, but I think these in general stand out in terms of those three significant phases. And really, we're kind of in one right now. That age of digital, that age of software and digital, is how do you large scale? Uh, how do I throw a bunch of money at something and get the desired result? And that's ultimately what agility is trying to do. Is trying to allow businesses to invest the capital in technology and people and process and all that to get the outcome and get the ROI as quickly as possible. And there's a bunch of studies around this. You can look up the term business agility. It is a hot term right now. I think the ones that really stand out to me are things like companies that have adopted Agile and Agile processes they grow 37% faster and generate 30% higher profits, which that's a real stat. And there's companies that aren't, and they like the way they've always done it, and they're now being overcome. They're part of that latter deployment stage where they're going to get overrun because other companies are going to be able to hit the ground running. But at the end of the day, everybody wants to be better, faster, cheaper, smarter, faster to market, all that. But you have to understand the competitive advantage that business agility actually gives. And if you're not on that train, you're going to have a problem. Um, I like to at least talk about some generic Scrum roles so that when I say in the upcoming discussion here, when I talk about the team, this is ultimately who I'm talking about. If you're not familiar with Scrum, there's basically three different roles on the team. You could be a Scrum Master, a product owner, or just a member of the team, kind of an individual contributor. The Scrum Master, there's been a lot of uh, myths about what the Scrum Master is and what the Scrum Master isn't. In different organizations, they may implement the Scrum Master wrong. I've seen it implemented really incorrectly over the years, where they make it the manager or something like that. And that is not what the Scrum Master's role is. Their responsibility is to enforce agile values and practices of the team, and to make sure that the team members are accountable. And that's ultimately their goal. Their goal is not to be a taskmaster. They are not a project manager. They are not going, what's the status of this? That's not their role. Their role is to make the individual contributors accountable to the product owner, product management, and other stakeholders, right? So the product owner is usually assigned to one or multiple teams, and they own the vision for the product and what the customer ultimately wants. They're the voice of the customer. They're responsible for the backlog, what gets worked on, and those type of things. And that gives the team direction. So the things that they're producing are of value to the organization. This is really where the hope would be between product management and product owners. They isolate what's the quickest way to deliver value to the marketplace and our customer. So they have to be able to really be in tune with the market and understand internally who can get those things done and what teams and groups can do that. Then lastly, the team members, like I said, they're responsible for engineering solutions, delivering shippable products, and being open and collaborative and having discussions to determine what ultimately needs to happen. So if you're not familiar with Scrum, those are the basic Scrum roles. So as I talk about the team, this is ultimately what I'm talking about. If you've adopted Agile in your organization, you could have gone through a simple Agile adoption, or you could have gone through a transformation. And I like to talk about this little chart here just a touch, because some folks' experience with agility and implementing Agile practices and Scrum and all that in their organization is very positive and goes very quick, and it's adopted very easily, and others do not, because there is a difference between simple Agile adoption at maybe a team or two team type level, which can usually go pretty quick. You're talking about getting 10 people to do something that makes sense, that they like to do and want to do. Cool, not a problem. But to try to get maybe 1,000 people to do something the same way or in a similar way, it's an issue. And getting everybody on the same page, not just from a vocabulary and dialect perspective, but how to work and being open and collaborative. sure we've all experienced somebody in their history that they did not really like working with because they weren't open and collaborative. I know I sure as heck have. So this is really the hindrance for a full scale transformation, and because of that, there's a lot of potential pitfalls that companies go through when they're trying to implement agile practices and methodologies in their organization. Um, the team levels may be working very well, but the leadership and the vision is not really clear, which means the teams are working on things that are not ultimately productive and something that can be used and made into to ROI for their time and effort. There's a bunch of issues with business involvement with the teams, even telling them what should be done. Employee engagement, where people don't want to be part of a team. They don't want to do it the way that others are doing it. They do their own thing and man, lead five. And potentially, depending upon how the organization is structured, you may have a bunch of siloed scenarios where people in this group don't talk to people in that group, and that's just the way it's always been, which causes a lot of friction, which then causes misalignment, which then where's your ROI? Because if the left hand isn't talking to the right hand, you can't get the thing done. So there's a lot of potential pitfalls with respect to agile implementations. So along comes scaled agile. Now, I won't. I want to do kind of a similar thing that I did with agile, and feel free to put it in the chat if you like. Who can give some a quick 10-second definition of SAFe or the scaled agile framework? I see some honest answers. I like that. Agile for large enterprises. Okay. I'm not going to say no to that because I think that definition kind of fits. I've seen SAFe be applied to organizations that are 100 people. So if that's your definition of large, then okay. Many teams working in one direction. Okay. Yeah. Scaled agile framework. Yeah. Applying agile in an agile way incrementally. Okay. Agile meets program management. I like that. I've never heard that. I like that. Okay. Portfolio management. Okay. Yeah, I've not seen anything I don't like. I think all those are good answers. So here's an actual definition. It's a set of organization and workflow patterns intended to guide enterprises in scaling lean and agile practices. And then Scale Agile released version 5.0 with 7 competencies for lean agile organizations to have along with their big picture. So we'll talk briefly about the big picture. If you're not familiar with this SAFe picture on the screen, that is the key essentially to all of what SAFe is and how it unlocks the potential in organizations. So ultimately, what Scaled Agile is trying to do is just getting to business agility, right? Not just development, the entire organization, which is, going back to our agile transformation kind of pitfalls, it's trying to get the whole organization involved, right? So SAFe is trying to encourage all of the pieces, especially 5.0, all of the pieces of the organization to be involved in that process. And it's not just a development initiative. It's not just for Scrum teams. It's not just, it's for product management. It's for executives. It's for the business. It's for any number of things that are not code in software, right? So this is kind of the cool thing that Scaled Agile shows every year at their SAFe Summit. This was the most recent one that they did in Europe. I want to say it was either January or February, and then they'll do another one, their normal traditional one in the United States in October, or at least it's still scheduled anyway. I don't know if they'll actually do it or not, but this gives you an idea of the size of Scaled Agile. When the first time I got introduced to SAFe was in 2017, and you should have seen these numbers then. It was a third or less than a third of that. So SAFE is a agile scaling methodology that is really growing. It's absorbing all of the other kind of competitors in the scaled agility marketplace. There's not a lot of companies that are doing other things other than SAFE. These large scale companies that are trying to implement SAFE internally. So let's start with a little bit of discussion of SAFE 5.0. What is it? What does it look like? What is it trying to do? We're going to start with this just kind of concept of a network to ultimately provide something to a customer. So I'm sure all of you at some point or another could understand or maybe have been involved in a small company, a mom and pop, a startup where there's more than 5 people. At the end of the day, if you don't get that customer to pay, to come in and buy your pizza, to come in and buy a website, to come in and whatever, you're going to have a problem. And sometimes that means going the extra mile. And really, that going the extra mile for the customer phrase is really what customer centricity means: is doing what we do and having the customer be at the center of that concept. And so it's very easy to understand how that network looks when you're a very small network and you're trying to satisfy a customer. So for example, small mom and pop pizza shop, that's a family owned shop, and literally it's 6 people that are a family that are the employees of this place. If the floor needs mopped, I'm sure one of the relatives are going to go and get the mop and mop the floor, right? Because they realize that's their livelihood. If they don't do that, the customer isn't going to want to come in or want to stay in their place, and ultimately isn't going to buy, right? So it's all these really weird ties. It's a network of trying to be focused on the customer. Now, how do you do that when you have a little bit larger network or larger hierarchy that these large scale organizations have? So, for example, one of the benefits of having a chain of command, people reporting to certain people, divisions that all do the same, kind of job role, or ultimately the same business value, a group of business analysts and a group of developers and a group of product management, a group of these. All the reason why organizations align that way is there's efficiency and stability in that. So there's a really good thing that comes out of those hierarchies. But the problem is they don't innovate very well. So if you look at a very small organization with a very small network, that speed of innovation, the mom and pop pizza shop, every one of those people in there is probably talking to a customer at any one point, and they can give feedback to the others to go, hey, the customers are not liking our white pizza, and maybe we need to do something different. We're not, it's too much salt or whatever. And they can give that feedback, and the speed of innovation and change happens very, very easily, very dynamically. But it's that same change in an organization, let's say, and I'm not picking on anybody, but a Papa John's or a Domino's, for example, changing the salt, content in a certain pizza, that's going to take a lot of effort, right? And a lot of moving parts to be able to do that. So that's the type of thing that we're talking about with organizations that they want to have that efficiency and stability of a hierarchy, but they also want to have the speed of innovation and customer centricity, right? So ultimately what Scaled Agile is trying to do is put that customer centricity inside of that hierarchy. Now, that is extremely difficult to do, and it does take a lot of work and a lot of effort, and that's where SAFE is trying to talk about patterns of success. These certain things work, these certain things don't do the wrong thing. Sorry, my screen is locked up. Let me look over here. There we go. So John Kotter, if you're not familiar with Kotter, we'll talk about one of his books at the end. In a book recently that he wrote, Accelerate, talked about having to have a dual operating system. So essentially having to have the hierarchy to allow you to have the efficiency and stability and the controls, but how do you have the speed of innovation too? And that's what SAFE 5.0 was ultimately trying to build, was a value stream network that also provided on the backside that functional hierarchy, which had the constructs to allow for approval process and all that, but without hindering innovation. So with that, let's talk a little bit about the what is called the SAFE big picture. This is their big diagram that's listed right on the website. So there's a lot of different things in here, and we'll talk about a couple of them as we go through. Just keep in mind that diagram is a very comprehensive, and to train on everything in this diagram would literally take a couple weeks to go through everything. So I'll do my best to do it in about 5 minutes to cover the most important points. This is actually the full SAFE version. There's multiple different versions of this picture, depending upon what SAFE configuration you're looking for. But this is the full SAFE implementation. And if you start at the bottom where it says Lean Agile Leadership, those things in gray are kind of the core values of SAFE 5.0. There's SAFE principles, there's a Lean Agile mindset, the SAFE core values, an implementation roadmap, and the SPC, the SAFE program consultant. Those are kind of the coaches that help you through these transformations and get things implemented. In that essential tier in white, those are the things that happen every day at the team and potentially program level. So your Scrum teams are there, your Kanban teams are there, your shared service teams, maybe your IT group, your IT infrastructure group, they're all there. And there's a iteration planning cycle, kind of like a quarterly development cycle. They call it PI, program increment, and a PI is where those yellow bars are. And the PI planning is a 2-day event that happens during those yellow bars. And that event is everybody from an Agile release train, and I'll talk about a train here in a second, everybody from an Agile release train getting together and talking through what the business value of the goals that the executives want to accomplish in the next 10 weeks. And then the folks that are on every team have the ability to say, yeah, we can get that done, or no, we can't, or I don't know, or whatever. And you talk through, there's feedback between the business units and the development units to be able to understand what are the objectives, what can be accomplished in that time frame. And there's normal Scrum 2-week sprints inside of there. There's 4 normal development cycles, 4 normal sprints, and then the last one is a innovation and planning sprint, which no actual work is calculated for. This should be where you actually do innovation, you do a hackathon, you do some research to determine if something is even possible. You kind of play around and determine what can and can't be done. That way, when you go into the next PI planning, you actually have an understanding of these things can be done or these things can't be done, so that you can give it a good evaluation of what needs to happen. So like I said, there's a lot on here. Large solution is multiple Agile release trains. We'll talk about trains here in a second. And then portfolio is really big picture. Where's the company going? Big muscle movements. So that's the SAFE big picture. Again, we'll talk more about that here in a second. So you heard me talking about Agile teams and kind of what they look like. They're cross-functional. The hope would be is you have people on the team that can define, build, test, and deploy all on the same team. And if you can't do that, they're probably not really an Agile team. They're maybe a pseudo-Agile team, but they're not really an Agile team. And this is where I think SAFE does a lot different methodology than some of the other methodologies out there for scaling. Is they have this concept of Agile release trains. The individuals on a train should be any team that is contributing to that value stream, and that will include people from the business, people from product management, people from security, people from hardware, people that may not be the traditional development groups. It's anybody that messes with that value stream, and that could be up to 125 people. And while that's a good and bad thing, I think the thing that allows it to be successful is the fact that they do every 10 weeks, you're in the same room, or now virtual room, as everybody else, and you have to talk through what can get done in that next 10 weeks, which is something if you've ever been in the kind of the traditional waterfall environment, or even an agile environment where you don't have feedback. It's, hey, here's the task to do, team. You got to go do them. This allows for team members, individual contributors, to give feedback to an executive to say, we can't do that in this amount of time, and here's why. and you don't waste the time playing an example that say, yeah, I can do that, and you go through the next 10 weeks and you know you can't do it, and then only 10 weeks later to go, yeah, we couldn't get that done. Why don't you just say it up front and say, hey, here's why, and then you can start solutioning for why not, as opposed to wasting that time and that sunk cost. So ultimately, the creation of agile release trains and PI planning make SAFe a very different scaling methodology in comparison to others like DAD or LESS or whatever. So when I say team, that really looks like that bottom left-hand corner in red. Now, all the other roles that are listed there are still important too, and they're teams just as well. And I would say from a general sense, somebody who is or has been a BA could easily fit into almost any one of those roles that are listed there in red. And that's everything from a product owner on a team all the way up to an enterprise architect. There's really nothing preventing somebody with BA skill and being in a BA role before being in one of these positions going forward. All right, so we talked briefly about the different configurations. I showed you the full SAFe, but there's also just large solution, just portfolio, and just essential. So just if you see those, they are handled just a touch differently. If you're not familiar with SAFe, I would highly, highly recommend that you go check out the Scaled Agile website and look at the case studies that they have listed on the site. This 30% happier, more motivated employees, and 50% faster time to market, and 50% reduction in defects, and 35% increase in productivity. Those are real, and they're real case studies with real examples and companies that you and I know. So if you're not sure if it's the right thing, if it's the right fit, go look and see what others maybe in your industry have actually done. It's pretty cool reads. As companies kind of go down the converting to SAFe road, and SAFe saw some patterns and anti-patterns. So they developed this a couple years ago, an implementation roadmap, because they would see companies trying to implement SAFe and they were kind of, I don't want to say doing it wrong, but they would do it and fail. And it was because they weren't following some best practices and guidance and whatnot. But there wasn't anything actually published from Scaled Agile that said this is the right path to go on. So they published this, and they've been really pushing this for years, so that way people that are implementing Scaled Agile in their organization know the things that they need to do and kind of in what order. And obviously, probably the one thing I want to highlight on there more than anything is that Scaled Agile Partner Network icon that's right next to implementing SAFe. So that icon really is intended to say, if you're not sure how to do this internally on your own, which I would say 99% of companies do not know how to do it by themselves on their own at that stage, work with one of the partners like C Prime. We do this type of stuff all day long, so we can help guide you through that transformation, not just from a training perspective, which is part of it, but from a coaching perspective too, running PI plannings. Once you kind of see that and see how that works, maybe for a couple PIs or three, you can go, okay, we understand how to work it now. Well, now we can kind of start doing this ourselves or implementing it ourselves. But to do it yourself from scratch is very difficult. But it talks about, after that partner network icon, leading SAFe and lean portfolio management, and getting the executives to understand and buy into SAFe. And then all the way through that roadmap, each role and each group has kind of their own training set aside. And we will kind of go through all those. So I don't want to do it on the roadmap, but we will talk about that too. All right. So now let's talk about the actual certifications that come along with the Scaled Agile framework and where they fit. So if you're looking at the big picture, I did this the other day just to kind of see where all of the certifications lie on the big picture. And if you're counting, I think there's 13 of them, and that's kind of where they sit on the big picture. Pretty cool to see them laid out this way. They're usually laid out a different way. Like, here's an example slide of all of the different certifications, and there is a really detailed description of all those on the Scaled Agile website. So feel free to look at that if you wanted to learn more. If I don't cover enough tonight for you, but these are kind of the core certifications. So this is the 13 listed. everything from leading safe to implementing safe, a bunch of acronyms. And this is where folks kind of aren't really sure where to start. So I always point out these are the three that I would consider entry level. And I'll talk about these three real quick and the differences between the three. So leading safe is a great class. You could be a developer, or you could be a chief executive officer for a company and find value in this class. It talks about how it changes teams, how the organization needs to change. It's really changed from a leadership level, but it's a 2-day class. Potentially could be longer virtually. Sometimes we're running like a 3-day class where it's kind of a half day, I guess, if you will, for 3 days as opposed to 2 days in person. But leading safe is, for most organizations, that's where I say this is where to start. Safe for teams, and by the way, you can find a leading safe class almost anywhere. C Prime offers them, but other companies do too, publicly and privately. So you can always find a leading safe class. Safe for teams is a little bit different, but still very similar to leading safe. Safe for teams is, I want to take my 10 team members and I want us to learn safe all at one time. It's kind of like a little bit leading safe, but rather than trying to convince you that there is a change that needs to happen in your organization, it's assuming the change that decision's already been made, the change is already going to happen. Now let's talk about how does that impact the teams? What do the teams need to do differently? What's their involvement in PI planning, for example? Those type of things. So it's usually not run publicly. Companies usually won't run that for anybody to just join in. Safe for Teams is usually run privately when you're trying to get an Agile release train up and running. So that's, in most cases, a private class, but very similar to Leading Safe in its content. And then Safe for Government is, well, Safe for Government. There are obviously compliance and regulatory things that happen in government agencies that don't happen anywhere else. So Safe is trying to account for that. It's very similar to Leading Safe, but obviously tailored for government specific stuff. So if you're looking for an entry level certification for Scaled Agile, those would be the places I would look. Now, what's the best fit for a BA? I would say probably the product owner, product manager certification is another good class. Again, a 2-day class, or potentially 3 days if it's half days. But that class really talks to if a historically BA is converting to a product owner or potentially in product management, that class is specifically tailored to that. Talks about backlog refinement. It talks about prioritizing and making sure the team understands that prioritization. It talks about your role in PI planning, which is somewhat different than folks on a development team. So it goes into a little bit finer detail of a product owner, product management role, more so than the other 3 that I just showed. Another kind of cool one is that Agile product management certification class. This is a newer class from Scaled Agile that they brought out with version 4. Was it out in 4.7? Either it may have been 5 or maybe in the last release before that, but relatively new, probably within the last year and a half. Very good class. I've sat through parts of it, and it really talks about where do you begin determining what the backlog looks like? Where do epics come from? Kind of like that type of concept, and how do you get MVPs out the door, and how do you get it to product owners and teams that can actually execute that guidance? So that's pretty cool. If you're one that is going more the Scrum Master route, there is a Safe Scrum Master role training. Again, another 2-day class, but very specific to obviously being a Scrum Master in a safe environment. All right, so mapping roles mapping the BA work to roles. So I feel like if you've done anything in Agile, you kind of understand this mantra, where you may do a lot of requirements strategy if you're in a business analyst in a traditional waterfall environment. But if you're a product owner in an Agile environment, you're going to have to figure it out a little bit in a different way. Still a lot of the same types of things, but maybe just done in a different way. So very much the same with regards to progression to potentially a product manager as well. And this was what I would say that onion diagram, I think, really you get an idea of how the team works at the business analyst level, and at the product owner level, and then really you're now connecting strategy to implementation, and that product manager role, that could be a potential career progression for you if you're in that role. And if you're implementing SAFe, product management is an essential part of the SAFe kind of big picture and patterns and successful implementations of product. I wanted to include this conversation that Ken France and I had. So if you're not familiar with the name, Ken is the practice head for C Prime's Scaled Agile practice. Ken's one of roughly 100 SPCTs in the world, which is the highest certification you can get in Scaled Agile. He's also a SAFe fellow, and there's only 18 of those in the world. So pretty small group. And Ken is an awesome guy to be around, really, really smart guy, has seen a lot of different things. And so as I was developing this talk a while ago, he and I sat down and had a conversation, and then we were going back and forth in Slack. So I asked him, I said, hey, can I copy what you just sent me and put this in a slide? Because I think it's spot on. And I'll make sure Randy has this so it can be distributed too. But I think this quote, I know it's a little long, but this is exactly what Ken sees in the wild, so to speak. And so there's a lot of concern when people that are traditional BAs see and hear companies implementing Scaled Agile, because they start looking around and going, well, where's my role as a BA? It's not on here. It's not in any of the roles. And because of that, it creates a bunch of paranoia from BAs that they go, well, I'm going to be fired, or I'm not going to have a job, or they're going to make me do something else or something different. And I think it's really important to have somebody like Ken that sees inside of Fortune 100 companies that are implementing SAFe and all the growing pains they have with it and how they're doing it. And he said, I see patterns of good SAFe practices where BAs are looking ahead at the program level, but still work with teams. And so not unlike, what you would do as a BA in a traditional environment as well. It's not radically different. It's just now you have the ability to do it incrementally. And if you've not worked in an Agile environment, I mean, it's super hard to do. The other thing I think, the other point I wanted to make on this that I think is extremely important, oftentimes the work they do is not visible. And because of that, he's basically said, if BAs go away and that work doesn't get done by a PO or PM, then it falls to the team. And I know we all know developers that are not going to do analysis, right? That just isn't going to happen. So it just doesn't get done. And then what happens is there's no real value delivery because the analysis hasn't been done. So I love providing people with some real world view of SAFe. Just because there isn't a role that says BA does not mean that BAs aren't in and don't do work in a Scaled Agile environment. I hate that that's a stigma. I hate that that's a thing. BAs absolutely fit in. Here's a SAFe fellow saying that's the case. Okay, so a couple of other things to map to kind of roles and certification. I would say of all the certifications that are there, these would be ones to kind of look for. If you're not looking at leading SAFe, these are ones that I would say would map pretty well to a BA, a traditional BA. If you're going to take these on your own, or you're looking for an introduction beyond leading SAFe, or you've got your leading SAFe cert, then these would be the next ones to kind of look for. I've included some additional material here to kind of hopefully further your understanding of lean and SAFe practices. I mentioned the Cotter book, Accelerate. Really, really good book, and it's a newer book for him. He's put out a bunch of really good books in the past, but this is relatively new in the last couple of years. The Mick Kirsten book, Project to Product. If your organization is not already looking at that, they will soon. That's a model that will be adopted by pretty much every company and every organization putting out digital products, internally or externally. And then the last one I'll leave you with is probably one of my favorite like Agile and DevOps stories. That Leading the Transformation book is a phenomenal book. It's a really short paperback. And it's about HP's their laser printer line, their transformation from 2008 to 2011 with their laser printer products, and how they could have essentially died because of the decisions that they were making. And it's very simple decisions like what processor are we putting in all of our printers, and they decided to do different size processors in all of their printers, because you don't need the same one in the small one that you do in the big one, right? We'll just we'll scale them down, and they'll be very small processors. But what that did is that caused different code base for every single processor. So adding a feature to their laser printer line was a nightmare, because you had to update it like 10 times for all the different processors that were there. So Agile and DevOps practices, when they really refine them, and yeah, they were maybe spending more money to put the same processor in all of their laser printers. From a bottom line perspective, they thought, oh, that'll cost us a lot of money. But what they gained in having one code base was they could add features literally in a couple of days. So talk about changing the game. They now went from doing no innovation to doing innovation in a very short cycle. So implementing those practices, and I know that's not safe specific, but to me, this is a way of implementing something that works for the organization that ultimately provides value. And that, at the end of the day, that's all SAFe is trying to do, to provide structure that gives output value for the customer. Here's a quick slide of what C Prime does. Randy had mentioned that I'm from ASPE. We're in that weird stage where C Prime has acquired ASPE back in September of last year, and we're not completely rebranded yet, so we're just in that weird phase. But these are all of our combined numbers from a consulting practice perspective. We've worked with pretty much all of the Fortune 100 and Fortune 500, and we do a lot of work all over the globe, not just in the U.S., and certified tons and tons of people. So from a certification perspective, we've been there, done that. We work with a lot of big companies, big and small. We've seen SAFe implementations in companies that are under 100 people. So don't think that just because it's SAFe, it has to be super large, but that happens too. Our SAFe training modalities, the way we deliver SAFe training, when we are allowed to do in person, we do in person. Obviously, there's no in person now for quite a while. Probably through August is what Scaled Agile is saying at a minimum, and then they'll kind of reevaluate here in a month or two. But most likely, it'll continue to be live online. And SAFe traditionally was not doing live online until all the recent COVID stuff. So they're actually a little bit behind other certifying bodies in allowing online training. We've actually helped a lot with that because we've been doing online training for such a long time. So to get our trainers spun up with some of the tools and technology has been very helpful for them, because we know that landscape. I included a couple upcoming training sessions on some of the classes that I thought may be applicable here. The first two bullets there for leading SAFe, those are guaranteed to run classes. So if you're looking for a class and you do have the time, those are actually guaranteed to run. The POPM classes in June and August are not guaranteed yet, but the more folks we get in them, the more likelihood they will be as soon as we get closer to those dates. And then I'm going to leave y'all with a freebie. So we actually are giving away a bunch of e-learning from our ASPE library. So if you want a Foundations of Agile or a Foundations of DevOps e-learning, those are free for right now and until the foreseeable future. The promo code is progress. So if you go and add that to your cart and use the code progress at checkout, you'll get a free e-learning that you can take while you're sitting at home, potentially doing nothing. If you're like most folks, but apparently not like me, because I'm mega busy. But if you do have time to learn and get your hands on some additional learning, there's some options for you there. All right, I've been yapping for a while. I'm going to pause. Questions, comments?
I think we actually have a few questions, and I'll give everyone the opportunity to kind of add into the chat box if you guys have any other questions. But I have a few that some of you have asked already, and I had a couple too. So please feel free to add to the chat your questions. Victor asked, he said that he always assumes Scrum when he hears Agile. So he wanted to know how people are doing Agile differently, the different frameworks.
Sure. So short answer is, and if you look at the State of Agile report, you'll see the people that do respond, which is a pretty good cross section of companies. Um, Pure play Scrum is like 58, 60% of the market. So obviously there's a reason why you hear that the most. Lot smaller is pure Kanban. Then you'll hear terms like Scrumban, uh, uh, and all these hybrids, XP. XP is extreme programming. So there are other methodologies from a team agile perspective. I'll give you a great example. So Scrum works great for development teams. Scrum does not really work good for IT infrastructure folks, because their work is not, you don't work in the same way that developers do. You're not looking at a feature or a story and trying to figure out the code to implement for that. IT infrastructure teams are usually given, I need this piece of infrastructure set up, or I need you to acquire this software, which is a little bit, it's a queuing system as opposed to a priority system. And so Kanban works so much better for them because it's kind of no more than one or two or three items as a work in progress or WIP. So for those things, for those kind of workflows, Kanban works better than others. For some organizations, they love implementing Scrum and XP, and a couple of the practices in XP are things like pair programming, where you'd have a junior developer with his hands on the keyboard and a senior developer sitting right beside him, and they're the ones helping, saying, no, go use this function or do it this way, so that they're guiding the junior programmer. And so that's kind of a pair programming thing that comes from XP, and that's not really related to Scrum at all. But that's a practice that you can implement together with Scrum. So there's different ways to implement Agile. Agile does not always mean Scrum, but because it's the most common, then yeah, that's why you hear it the most.
Great, awesome. That is very insightful and helpful. Bethany, Steve, and Sheena wanted to know if they could get copies of the SAFe 5.0 diagrams. I know you kind of answered it, and Dinelka's also shared a link, scaledagile.com, SAFe-50, but you also said that you'll share it with us, which is awesome. So you all will get a copy, those of you who have joined us today. And to answer part of Geisha, your question, yes, we're going to also provide a copy of the presentation on our site also. Steve had a question that I believe that you might have answered a bit, which was, what is the SAFe certification training track? Which training track do you recommend? And I believe you said the product owner, product manager.
Yeah, I would say it depends, and my depends answer is, if you're not doing Agile today, and you're just kind of doing this as a professional development thing, I would say take an Agile class first. We provide IC Agile classes or Scrum Alliance classes like Certified Scrum Master, Certified Product Owner. So those are classes that are more foundational in nature. If you are practicing Agile in your workplace today and you're trying to learn more about SAFe, I would say leading SAFe would be probably my first bet, but product owner, product manager would be a very close second, because if you have any understanding of SAFe, then maybe leading SAFe is not the place to go, and POPM is, because that's more of the execution of that job and that role, as opposed to what the heck is this big diagram. Although they talk about the big picture diagram, it's more of a in context of product owner, product manager. What things are you involved in? What activities are you involved in? So it's very specific to that role. So I would say I've had more BAs go through POPM than anything else, but leading SAFe is such a good class, that may change, if you're especially in a leadership role, it may change how you view implementing Agile and SAFe in your organization.
Awesome. Thank you. And Steve, actually, you probably saw Steve's comment about the e-learning. So Steve, these are the.
Let me interrupt real quick, Randy, because I'm going to get back by Danelkis. Danelkis, yes, there is a Agile Extension Certification AAC. Yes, you should take that class too. Sorry, Danelkis.
I get this is about scaled agile, so I was staying quiet, but
no,
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. We are going to also share about the all of the IIBA certifications after this Q&A session also, including the Agile certification. Thank you, Danelkis. And so Geisha, we answered yours. Victor asked, do you have a public sector business case or example of SAFe? And I don't know if he wants to elaborate more on that, but that's what he asked.
I read that one. I don't have one off the top of my head. I do know that there are pockets of federal agencies that are implementing SAFe. I was actually in an SPC class in 2018 where there was 2 contractors from 2 separate companies working with 2 separate agencies that they had buy-in, but this was before the SAFe for Government class had even come out. And they were, after the first class, they were saying this is going to be a bear to implement. So I would say it's been implemented in pockets. I don't know if I feel like there is at least one, if not more, public sector case on the case study page on Scaled Agile. I just don't know it off the top of my head. I feel like VA, USPTO, and I feel like there was another agency. Those are the ones that I've heard the most with taking SAFe training classes, but I don't have the details off the top of my head of beyond that, what departments were using it beyond that.
Okay, that was very helpful though. I'm sure between the learning, these learning examples, and I think there's a government, I don't know if you're, what specifically, if you have an example, Victor, if you could maybe elaborate further, and maybe Michael can answer a little bit more what you're asking there. Vladimir says, what to do when the MVP doesn't fit a single program increment, resulting in not delivering anything at the end, though every team member did do a great job. Is delivering something better than delivering nothing?
That is a phenomenal question, and one that I've seen asked a bunch of times from the folks that see SAFe. They see the program increments and they get freaked out because they're like, what happens if it's a bigger thing and I can't deploy within a PI? And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. That actually is a common thing, especially for large enterprise, where you would love to be able to produce something every PI, but that's why the PI planning is so important, so that before day one, literally day 0 or day -1, you will, before the PI starts, developers can say, hey, we're not going to be able to deliver this before the end of the PI, but the next PI after that will be able to deliver it maybe the 3rd or 4th sprint. And then that way the business unit actually hears that, knows that, and they can go, okay, cool. So when we do these PI planning and we're going to do a demo, after certain sprints, you're just demoing where you're at in the process every 2 weeks. And that's the beautiful part about it is there's an assumption that you have to deliver it within the PI, but you really don't.
Okay. That was a great example. Danelkis, I know you have to drop off, but we wanted to thank you for always supporting us. You are absolutely the best and for stepping in and helping facilitate some conversation tonight. So does anyone have any additional questions? If not, I'm going to hand over to Nosa, who's kind of finish with some with our next event, a little heads up on our next event, and some other things about IIBA. So
thank you, Ryan. I think Todd had a question. I'll just go ahead and read Todd's question.
Yeah, go ahead.
You talked about Agile release teams meetings periodically. How do you make sure IT infrastructure teams using Kanban are delivering what you need for a sprint?
So in SAFe, they call that a shared resource team or a shared services team. And mostly IT infrastructure kind of consists of that, where let's say there is, I'm throwing out an arbitrary number. Let's say there's 5 Agile release trains in a company. They may be part of all 5 Agile release trains because they're shared, right? And so they would have accountability and visibility and providing visibility into their backlog to everybody in every train, which is great because that allows others to see what work with other trains is being impacted on their train because they're a shared service team. So that is I think that's more of a really get down to the individual situation type question because that is a real world problem. Every organization handles it a little bit differently. Some providing visibility and communicating fixes the problem. Sometimes it's standardizing things fixes the problem. Sometimes reprioritizing by a CIO fixes problems because they'll say this train is priority, this train is not. So every situation like that is resolved differently, but in a general sense, you're calling out a really good scenario that does happen in the wild. Is shared services teams are kind of stretched thin sometimes.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Again, I'm just going to start off by saying thank you very much to Michael. This was an awesome presentation, great content. The delivery was any word that was close to perfect, if not more than perfect. So thank you. I will also express my thanks to everyone who is on the phone. Thank you for joining, giving us your time, making sure that you were here to witness this event and to listen to Michael's presentation. I will quickly go over, some of the options that we have as a group, as an organization, as IIBA. We already know the core certifications, the ECBA, the CCBA, and the CBAP. Everyone wants to take the CBAP. I was speaking to someone on LinkedIn today in our group, the South Florida IIBA chapter group, and he's a new BA in South Florida, but's been here for about 20-something years, and we just wanted to start getting certified. And we had some conversation, and I said, well, if you've been a BA for 20-something years, you could definitely take the CBAP already. So there are the core certifications. However, if you are more interested in some of the specializations, then IIBA does have the security path, which is the CCA, fairly new. As we know, there are always discounts on the new certifications to take them, and then you can get a rebate back to make sure, to incent you back for taking the exam as you contribute towards helping them to get scoring metrics and to make that exam better for everyone else who's taking it in the future. For the AAC, that is the Agile path that Nelkis was talking about earlier, and that also supports foundationally what Michael has delivered us today on the SAFe. Proud to announce that our Vice President of Sponsorship, our host today, Randy, was just certified in her AAC. So I would love for all of us to congratulate her as she takes that on, as well as a bunch of other certifications representing the organization. And then finally, the BAD, which is the Business Data Analytics. For many of us who are BAs but work in BI, work with analytics and all of that, this would be a path that you will be very interested in. So most of the data guys, there is a path for you, the IIBA, CPDA. So just calling those out. Again, huge perks to taking these exams. And of course, you get more benefits being not just a global member, but also a chapter member. Soon there will be study groups to support these certifications. And I know that many other chapters, if we go on chapter the events page on the website, IIBA Global, have some paths right now, study groups that are administering trainings for CBAP as well as the AAC and the ECBA. So just calling these out to make sure that we are constantly improving ourselves professionally in our field. If you are not a member of the South Florida chapter and you're on this call, please do go to the website and make sure that you become a member. Huge perks to becoming a member. Reach out to Randy, myself, or any of our executives or the board members or any of our leaders. I will love to speak to you one-on-one and see how best the chapter can be of value to you. And just to call out our upcoming event on the 23rd of June, we're going to be talking with Denelkis, and she will be giving us an awesome presentation also. So please mark that date in your calendars, and you will be receiving the emails from us as a chapter notifying you of this event for you to RSVP for that day. At this point, I will also call out our social media handles. We are on Twitter, we are on LinkedIn. Please follow us. We post out a lot of content, some things from IIBA Global, some things that are value adds to our members in the industry, some tips for how to do things better, some challenges that you may be experiencing currently in your workplace, and we may just throw some content in there that makes it easier for you to do something in a tool. And then, of course, just general support for our community. Please make sure to follow the chapter on social media, Twitter and LinkedIn. And with this rounds up our presentation today. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you for everything that you have been, thank you for being here, actually. The questions, the comments, the participation, it's been awesome. I see a comment there that says shout out to Bluegrass. I will give the shout out to Bluegrass. Yes, Bluegrass has definitely been doing a lot, especially for the CBAP, yes. So please, if you are ready to take one, I think Bluegrass has one coming up soon. So please make sure you are on their website and booking yourself for a session. I will hand it over to Randy for her to close us out.
Oh, well, thank you everyone for joining. We don't have anything left, but we just want to thank you for joining us again. We'll make sure that the video is available online at southflorida.iiba.org. We'll make sure that you get the slide deck for today. And also, if you have any questions about the South Florida chapter, or if you're interested in membership, please either go to our website and contact us, or you can also email the president at president@southflorida.iiba.org. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope that you also are available to join us in June, on June 23rd at 7 p.m. with Denelkis, who is actually our founder. She works for the corporate IIBA, and she's a CBAP, and she'll be sharing with us. So look forward to that coming up in June. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.